It's my great pleasure to introduce Robert L. Kelly, who's the professor of anthropology at the University of Wyoming. He received his bachelor's degree at Cornell. Do we have any Cornellians here? One or two? Yeah, see? There you go. And then his doctorate is from the University of Michigan. And I know there's some Michiganders here, because I'm one of them, and I recognize you. Bob is the author of over 100 books, articles, and reviews. He's a past president of the Society for American Archaeology, and he's currently editor of the journal American Antiquity, which is one of the world's top-ranked journals in archaeology. He was an SAR resident scholar in 1988-89, and more recently, and I didn't know this until this afternoon because he's too modest to tell me, but he was honored with Germany's Alexander von Humboldt Research Foundation Award for Lifetime Achievement, which is a pretty big deal, especially for German. The title of his talk is based on his recent and I must say wonderfully readable book, The Fifth Beginning: What 6 Million Years of Human History Can Tell Us About the Future. Let's give a great Santa Fe welcome to Bob Kelly. Good to go?
Well, I certainly want to thank Michael and the school for the invitation to come and speak. It's wonderful to be back in Santa Fe. And I'll give a big shout out to where we ate dinner last night, Jumbo Africa. If you have not been there, you should definitely put that on your list. If you ask archaeologists why they do what they do, they will first give you a very honest answer, because it's fun. And then if you push them a little bit further to justify their existence, they'll probably quote you Winston Churchill. The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you can see. And that's what I want to try and do this evening. Look backward in order to look forward a little bit. And in order to do that, you first have to know something about how archaeologists think. That's a huge subject, of course, but I just want to focus on two things. One is that archaeologists, in the words of Alice Wiley, think from things. We work with stuff. We like nothing better than a box full of broken, busted up, dirty potsherds. I mean, this just makes us excited, right? Okay, we're a little odd in that way. We only work with things. That's the only stuff that we have to work with. The other thing you have to know is that it's a little hard for us to really control time. So we talk about time in these kind of chunks or slices, and we're always trying to find ways to make those slices tighter and tighter and tighter, but sometimes it's difficult. And you're familiar with some of the names of these slices of time, things like Stone Age, Copper Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. And those different slices of time are defined by different things, different objects, different pieces of technology, different ways of decorating pots, and so on. We put these two things together, these chunks of time defined by material things, and one of the things that we've learned, one of the lessons we've learned, is that these chunks of time, denoted by different things, point out periods of time when the organization of human society changed. The objects themselves are not necessarily always the cause of that change. They're really just a signal that a change has happened from one period of time to another. This is how archaeologists think about things. We think about things in terms of big chunks of time that are telling us something about changes in human organization. So a few years ago, when I decided that it was time, I lived up to what archaeology was supposed to do, look backward in order to look forward. I decided to take this property of archaeology, which I really see as our strength, and take it to its maximum. And look at the entire world, all of prehistory, all 6 million years of it, So we have to go through this kind of quickly, right? All 6 million years of it, and look to see if there were periods of time that were defined by some really, at the highest possible level, changes in material culture that were signaling a change in the organization of human societies at an almost a global scale. I say almost a global scale because it took a little while for humans to get around the entire globe, as you'll see. I kind of think of this as sitting in the back row of an IMAX theater and watching a really long movie. And it goes on and on and on, and right, things happen, okay, right, character development, blah, 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 so on, things happen. And then something happens in the movie where stuff changes, the story changes. It's like, oh my God, Darth Vader is Luke's father? It's like, okay, it's a different story now, right? So human history begins, it's always hard to say, where is the beginning? I mean, it's the Big Bang is the beginning, right? But we don't have time to go back all the way there. So let's just start with humans split off from the primate line, the line that would become humans, splits off from the primate line about 6 million years ago. The others go on to become chimps and bonobos. So the human line splits off 6 million years ago. For quite a long time, we're just one of a number of kind of interesting primates wandering around in the forests and on the savannas, until about 3.3 million years ago, when one of those primates picked up a stone tool and, for whatever reason, figured out that you could knock flakes off of it and use it as a tool to do something. And we're honestly not entirely sure what they were doing with these tools, but it almost certainly has something to do with hunting or scavenging of large animals on the savanna. Life kind of rolls along. We never gave up technology, right? This is a basal adaptation for the human species. Right there, that modest little Oldowan chopper there that anyone in here could make, that's the beginning of space travel, right there. We go on, the stone tools change a little bit. They allowed us to become a pretty successful species because sometime after those tools appear, our ancestors spread out of Africa, moving into Southwest Asia, the parts of Southeast Asia, and eventually into Europe. We're not fully human at this point. We're a very interesting, intriguing primate using tools, but in my opinion, I'd say we're not fully human yet. Life kind of rolls along for quite a long time before we see another plot twist. Not until perhaps 200,000 years ago, and I suspect a little bit later than that. This is a really significant change. This is the origins of our capacity for culture, and this is really what makes us human. This is when we have the ability to use symbolic thought. It's when we have the ability to use metaphors or analogies or similes. It gives us the ability to tell stories, and it gives us the ability to tell lies as well. The evidence for it is seen in the material record. It's evidenced by the appearance of art. At first, it's some pretty simple, rudimentary art. This is a carved piece of ochre from Blombos Cave in South Africa. It's only about so big. It's got some modest little scratches in it, some X's with some lines connecting the middles and the tops and the bottoms. But that probably meant something to someone. I don't know what. I don't think we'll ever know what. It doesn't really matter to me. What matters is that it meant something. And we see it in shell beads that were worn as probably some kind of ornament, which again meant something to someone. It carried some sort of meaning. It wasn't simply a functional tool to achieve a task. It carried some kind of meaning to it. We see it in the later carvings, and then in the cave art of the Upper Paleolithic in Europe. This happens between 250,000 years ago. And along with this symbolic construction of the world, is burial ritual. This is a contentious topic. There are archaeologists who will tell you that Neanderthals buried their dead, and they indeed buried their dead. There's some excellent examples from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. But there isn't much evidence of burial ritual until rather late in prehistory. These are people who are not simply put into a pit and buried up, but there's some kind of ritual that goes along with it, covered in red ochre, given all sorts of material goods to accompany them. There's some sort of ritual here, and the ritual has to do with transforming someone from one stage of life, the living world, into the next stage of life. And the next stage of life implies some kind of religious thought. I don't know what this meant to people, and it doesn't really, to me, it doesn't really matter at this stage. What matters is that they were thinking about there's another world beyond this world. That's the capacity to think about the world symbolically. It's a capacity to think about a world that you can't physically touch. You can perhaps visit shortly during trances, do cave art in order to try and understand what was meant in that trance. This is a completely different way of thinking about the world, and it resulted in a new level of organization of humans into cultural groups. That appears, like I said, sometime between 200,000 and 50,000 years ago, and it made humans enormously successful, enormously, even more so than technology did. And there was certainly a lot of complex technology that went along with the development of culture as well. But soon after that, the appearance of cultural humans, real human beings as we know them, humanity spread all across the globe. We were stopped by literally nothing. By about 10,000 years ago, we've spread across all of Europe and Asia into Australia by 40,000, at least 40,000 years ago, across the Bering Strait into North America, all the way down to the tip of Tierra del Fuego by 10,000 years ago. The entire world gets colonized soon after the appearance of the capacity to be cultural. A radical shift in how, in the human capacity to occupy even some very, very inhospitable environments. There were very few places left uninhabited. Madagascar is one. Some of the Micronesian and Polynesian islands is another, the high Arctic, but they would all eventually be occupied by roughly 1,000 years ago. And it's interesting that soon after humans colonized the entire globe, we see the third beginning, and this is the origins of agriculture. Up until this point in time, everyone in the world has lived as my favorite kind of people, hunting and gathering folks. And they colonized the entire world as hunter-gatherers. Soon after that colonization of the world is complete, we see this shift. And this time, the material evidence for it is comprised of things like larger villages, more permanent structures, a variety of different kinds of structures, storehouses, wells, kitchens, a variety of different kinds of structures, and domesticated plants that the world had never seen before. All of these are coming out of a wild base. They had to come from someplace, of course. But their particular varieties and variants hadn't existed before and hadn't existed over the range of area that they would eventually expand over. Maize comes from the teosinte plant in southern Mexico. It would eventually expand down into South America, all the way up into southern Canada, occupying environments that it really wasn't adapted to, but which humans could make it adapt to. This is a radical change in the way humans are making their lives, a shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture. It's a change from nomadic hunting and gathering bands to far more sedentary groups. There's a shift also in trade and the kinds of things that are traded, not just sort of economic goods, but also what archaeologists technically call doodads and gewgaws, right? These fancy things that symbolize social relationships, and whose trade became extremely important because those relationships between different villages, between different regions, also became extremely important to these agricultural folks. Life rolls on. For not too long, the next plot shift occurs relatively quickly. And it's what anthropologists refer to as the origin of the state. And the state to anthropologists, that word to us, has a very particular meaning. It doesn't mean the state of New Mexico. It refers to a particular kind of political organization with multiple hierarchies, a ruling class, a sort of bureaucratic class, a managerial class, and then a larger working class at the bottom. There are very complicated reasons for why this shift happens that I won't go into here. The important part is that it's a dramatic shift in the way humans were organized into this very, very tightly hierarchical society. It does magnificent things. This is the kind of archaeology that many archaeologists want to go study because, let's face it, temples are really, really cool. Hunter-gatherers are a little cooler, but they don't have temples, right? This is the beginning of art, of widespread art, of specialists in art. It's not the beginning of art, but it's the beginning of specialists in art, individuals who were brought in to the employ of a ruler to do art, to paint, to do sculptures. It's the same thing happened with scientists and with architects, which led to the whole field of mathematics. Plenty of wonderful things came out of this. Plenty of not so wonderful things came out of it as well. This is when inequality really appears. Inequality just didn't exist in human societies really until states appeared. Some inequality, of course, but dramatic inequality in which these people have life or death control over these people, I can tell you hunter-gatherers would find that a very bizarre notion indeed. This is when slavery appears, the concept that it is perfectly acceptable, in fact, it is the natural order for our people to enslave your people. Another idea that would have been foreign to the hunter-gatherers who occupied the earth for much of human history. And this is when war appears. It's not the first appearance of violence. I'm sure the first Australopithecines that come up with a stone tool pretty soon got the idea, oh, I can smack Harry with this stone tool. I'm sure that they did. But that was a very personal level of violence. Harry was a real jerk and deserved it, believe me. But this is when war appears, when you have a standing professional class of warriors, a whole set of technology whose only purpose is to kill people. A whole group of people who are going to go slaughter somebody else, and really they've got no personal gripe with those folks at all. That's a very different way of organizing societies than what came before. Okay, that's 6 million years in a nutshell. I left a lot out, but the point here is that there are these 4 major times marked by some real changes in the material signature of humanity that marks changes in how human society was organized. Changes that you could kind of see happening across the face of the planet. Now, at this point, when I lecture to students, some of them, they'll accept everything I say because, after all, I can show you all the evidence for this, right? Cave art, pyramids, it's all there. It's hard to deny. But many people think, okay, now we're done. Yeah, there were lots of changes in the past, and now we're done. Imagine if you could go back in time, maybe 25,000 years ago, to France. It was a nice place back then, too. And talk with some hunter-gatherers. Sit around with them at night around the campfire. Look up at the moon and say to them, you know, someday men will go up there in a rocket ship made out of metal. And they'll do it because the elected president of a democratic nation vowed to make it happen within the decade using money raised from taxpayer dollars. Now, I'm sure these folks would lean across the fire and say to you, hang on a second, what's metal? And you could explain that to them, and you could explain everything else, you know, a president, an election, a democracy, a nation, tax dollars, money. You could explain all this to them. What do you suppose they would say? You're crazy. That'll never happen. Elect a leader? Live in a nation with thousands of people? It's inconceivable. And yet it would all happen. So the question is, what have we failed to imagine about our own future? Do we think we're done? They thought they were done. I'm sure that the early farmers along the Tigris-Euphrates thought that they were done. This is it. This is the maximum for human society. I'm sure the pharaohs thought the same thing. This is it. We're at the top. Things are good. It's not going to change. They're all wrong. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're done. This is a little hard to think about. Has there been a transition since the fourth beginning? We're still living in the fourth beginning. Has there been another transition? These transitions, they don't happen instantly. They take a while to happen. Agricultural origins in places took 1,000, 2,000 years to shift from a pure hunting and gathering to a pure agricultural economy. So I have to imagine, what would my colleagues, my archaeological colleagues, 10,000 years in the future, when they look back on the past, today, of course, is going to be their prehistory, similar to our prehistory today, are they going to see evidence of a fifth beginning? You can always see this best in hindsight, but I can't wait 10,000 years. I want to know if it's happening now. And I think the answer is yes. Yes, because remember, archaeologists look at things, radical global changes in the signature of humanity on the planet. So, is there any evidence in the material signature of humanity in recent times? I think the answer is yes, and it starts about AD 1500. This is one of the things that I think an archaeologist in the future would really pay attention to. This is a map of just the World War II era shipwrecks. There are thousands and thousands of shipwrecks around the world. Nautical archaeologists try and locate all of these so they can try and keep track of them. This is just the World War II era shipwrecks. If you could take all the shipwrecks in the world and date every single one of them, this is what archaeologists would do. They love to do this. We always like to date stuff, right? They would find that some of those ships, there's some very early ones, that are in the Mediterranean Ocean. Those would be Phoenician, Greek, Roman vessels. All the rest are after AD 1500. And they're not always close to land. Some of them are in very, very deep water. The Titanic, for example. This is the sort of thing that an archaeologist will go, whoa, wait a second. That's interesting. That's really weird. All these shipwrecks, they all date after AD 1500? What's that telling me? What's going on there? I think they'd also then look up in the sky, and they would look at the moon, and they would find stuff on the moon. They'd find stuff on Mars. They might even still find stuff on a comet if it isn't completely destroyed in space. They would date this stuff and they would find out, oh my God, it's all late 20th century stuff, late 20th, early 21st century stuff. And some of it's pretty weird stuff. I mean, some of it's logical stuff, the bases of the lunar landers and scientific equipment that just gets offloaded because they're taking rocks back, so if 10 pounds comes in, 10 pounds has to go out. There's also frozen bags of vomit. There's a wad of $2 bills. There's, of course, the famous golf club and golf balls that he wasn't supposed to take up there. There's a little statue, and I have to give a shout out to Michigan here. There's a plaque up there which is dedicated to the University of Michigan graduates on the moon. Go blue. They might also find some of the bits of millions of pieces of junk that are floating around the Earth. Satellites, but all kinds of stuff that's just floating around up there. Some of it will burn up in the atmosphere eventually, but a lot of it's going to be up there for thousands of years. It's the sort of thing an archaeologist would go, that's weird. What's this stuff doing off the planet? They'd see other things as well. They would find that stuff made in one part of the world, China, is present everywhere in the world. Every single place in the world. There's stuff made in China. They would find the technology designed to connect the world, to move massive numbers of people and goods around the world. How many airplanes are in the air right now, right this second? Anyone know? It's about 17,000 was the number that I've seen in the air right now, every second of every day. They would see the evidence for the connection of the world through the internet. The world is literally, the continents are literally linked together with cables. The first one laid in the middle of the 19th century. It didn't work out so well, but they kept trying and they eventually got it right. Last year, the world laid 100,000 kilometers of undersea cable. The year before that, it was 16,000 kilometers. We're literally tying the continents together. This is the sort of thing an archaeologist would pay attention to. Along with those shipwrecks, there's also these cables. What's that all about? Were they afraid that the continents were going to drift away from each other or something? We would see evidence for the movement of people as well, at a scale that the globe has never seen before. If you want to find skeletal remains with the genetic material of African populations in them prior to AD 1500, those are only found in Africa. After AD 1500, and looking at it as an archaeologist over the next 500 years, you can excavate cemeteries with skeletal remains whose DNA is African every place in the world. Every place in the world. Tierra del Fuego to Tromsø, Norway. Every place in the world, you'll find their skeletons with their DNA. This is something an archaeologist would pay attention to. My God, these people are moving all over the globe. And it's not just Africans, of course. It would be Europeans are now everywhere in the globe. But Asians as well are now everywhere in the globe. People are just moving around at a scale never before seen. An archaeologist would pay attention to this. They would also pay attention to the fact that our bones, archaeologists can look at the composition of bone, the chemical composition of bone, and we can sort of reconstruct what you ate for a diet over the last 25 years or so. Prior to AD 1500, your bones would reflect a very local diet. You're eating food grown within a fairly close radius of your home. By this point in time, in the early 21st century, your bones reflect the global food chain, right? I had a banana this morning. It was not grown in Santa Fe. I can guarantee you that. So we eat food coming from all over the world, and it's going to be reflected in the chemistry of our bone. This is, again, something an archaeologist would go, oh, that's really weird. That's really strange. The other thing we see, of course, is a change in the human footprint on the face of the planet. This is the United States at night today. And, a mere 200 years ago, it looked like that. 200 years to an archaeologist, that's nothing. This happens in our sense of time overnight. This is Denver in 1850. Yeah, you know what's coming, right? This is Denver today, 150 years later. Boom. An archaeologist would go, what in the heck just happened? We've got little, native folks living in teepees and maybe some log cabins, and then suddenly we've got skyscrapers. What happened? Archaeologists could probably evaluate settlement patterns. We're very good at this. And they would figure out that by 2007, most of the world's population lives in cities rather than rural areas. First time in human history. For the first time in human history. We'd see massive changes in just the sheer scale of stuff, the sizes of buildings. Dubai skyscraper, almost 2,700 feet high. The tallest structure in 2500 BC was Khufu's pyramid, which stood about 450 feet tall. And it held the record until, anyone know how? It held the record until about 1889 when the Eiffel Tower was built. We have cities like Tokyo that are approaching 40 million people. 40 million was probably the human population 5,000 years ago at the origins of states. The entire world's population at that time now lives in one city, in Tokyo. One of the world's largest structures in the world, humanly made structures in the world, is the Fresh Kills landfill on Staten Island in New York. And it was one of the largest structures even before we interred the wreckage of the World Trade Center there. One of the largest structures in the world is a garbage dump. Archaeologists will love this, but when you think about it, it's a little bothersome. This is just a massive impact of humanity on the face of the planet. You all know this. We've altered the composition of the environment. It's of the atmosphere that has a major change on the environment and the climate, and along with hurricanes and wildfires and we've changed the face of the planet. There's also been a massive increase in the speed of change, which again an archaeologist would look at in terms of things. My father was born in 1925 in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. At the time, the cool invention of the day was the zipper. You all think the zipper's been around forever, right? No, it's a relatively new invention. His icebox ran on ice, delivered to his house in a horse and wagon in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. This is kind of mind-boggling. However, my students are blown away by the fact that I had milk delivered to my house and put in a little metal box outside the door. They say, no, that didn't happen. The vacuum tube came along when my father was a young man. Then that gets replaced by the transistor, right, which is, our generation's older folks in here. That's our generation's cool technology. That's what gave us transistor radios and allowed us to get out of the house to listen to rock and roll music. And then along comes the microchip, which, is like its power is doubling, every 18 months or less than that? When I was a graduate student, which wasn't that long ago, damn it, This is the technology I lusted after. An IBM Selectric typewriter. That was it. I mean, you can't even find one today, right? My students have no idea what it is. They don't know what a slide projector is. They think iPhones have been around forever. They've been around for 10 years. That's it, only 10 years. So technologically, change is really, really increasing. And to an archaeologist, that tells us that other parts of human life are also probably changing as well. Much of the change has been driven by population growth. Origins of culture, agriculture, the state, population growth was behind a lot of this. It's not the sole factor, but it's the one I wanted to look at today because it took us 6 million years to reach a global population of 1 billion people around the middle of the 19th century. 1 billion around the year 1850. We've doubled and doubled and doubled again, on our way to doubling again. We're at I just looked it up this morning, 7.6 billion people, I believe was the number. Enormous number. And although population growth rates have slowed in recent decades from a high in the 1960s, its law of large numbers kicks in. We're going to keep on growing for quite a while. Young people will certainly see a world of somewhere between 8.5 and 10 billion people by AD 2050. That's not that far away. It's just 30 years. Heck, I might live to see it. Young people absolutely will live to see a world of close to 10 billion people. Put those facts together. There's this really dramatic change in the material signature of humanity. And that one of the driving factors, population, is really, we're going to add a lot of people to the world. This is like adding another couple of Chinas in India to the world over the next 30 years or so. And I think you can draw the logical conclusion. We're in the fifth beginning. It's happening now. So what does it entail? In the book, I talk about some of the processes that are at work to generate these these previous four beginnings. And that's sort of an exercise in looking for these processes that are at work sort of behind the scenes. I think of them as currents under the ocean, that at some point work jointly to reach a tipping point where the plot in the story changes dramatically. I think there's three processes here that I can talk about tonight. The cost of war, the economic effects of global capitalism, and the cultural effects of globalization. Globalization brought on by the operation of capitalism. Many people would tell you that the arms race is a 20th century phenomenon. It's not. It's been going on for 5,000 years since the development of the state and the appearance of warfare. An increase in offensive and defensive weapons, just back and forth, back and forth. This went on for a long, long time. And it probably reached an endpoint, a tipping point, with the development of nuclear weapons. You don't need a massive military force. Really, all you need is just one. You need a few backups, of course, but you really only need just one, and you can threaten to use it. And it's so devastating that it can protect you. In the meantime, we keep developing more and more expensive weapons of war because the threat is still there. This is just an example, though, of what this is costing us. World War II Mustang, key piece of military technology in World War II, especially in the Pacific. In today's dollars, cost about $700,000. That's expendable technology. They could build them at one a day at the height of World War II. Crank them out and just send them out there, shot down. They break a strut on a landing craft, you just throw them off because it's really throwaway technology. Stealth bomber is $800 million. You can't just shove that off the deck of an aircraft carrier. You'll get in a lot of trouble if you do that. USS Gerald R. Ford, which was 2 years behind schedule, just launched, $13 billion. The Zumwalt destroyer, $4.5 billion. These are really expensive pieces of technology. I'm sure they're also really good pieces of technology. But you don't really want to put them in harm's way. And yet, that's what they're designed to do. Does anyone know what the missiles cost for the guns on these ships? Nobody knows what the missiles cost? They cost about $1 million each. They're not just a big bullet like they were in World War II. They're a very, very complicated piece of machinery. And unfortunately, we kind of still need this stuff. But it's costing us a fortune. And a lot of money that, I don't have to tell people, a lot of money that could go to other things are going here. And yet, we live in a world where war and the deaths due to war have actually been declining steadily for a long time. Steven Pinker has documented this in his book, but others have also looked at it as well, that war is really kind of ending. And it's not really solving the problems it was intended to solve. World War II was 4 years. It solved the problem. How many years have we been in Afghanistan? 16? Have we solved the problem? We haven't. It's costing us a fortune. Estimates are as high as $6 trillion. Your children's children's children will be paying that debt off. So we're spending a huge amount of money on to solve a problem that technology apparently can't really solve. Capitalism, which some economists would tell you developed in the late 18th century. I'd actually argue it's a little bit earlier than that. Capitalism operates, it's successful by keeping the cost of labor low. That's how you make a profit. You can do it in various ways, but one of the ways is keep the cost of labor low. And one of the ways that capitalists did this was by moving labor to increasingly cheaper places, to the next cheapest place, I should say. So after World War II, we moved a lot of our labor to Japan. It moved to South Korea, moved to India, it's moved to China. China is now investing in Africa because they know they're going to have to move their labor base eventually to Africa. The world is finite, though. Its geography is finite. And at some point, capitalism will fully penetrate the entire globe. The nice thing about capitalism is that it tends to raise people's living standards. It did that in Japan, did it in the US, did it in Japan, South Korea. It's doing it in India and China now. This is the good part of it. It raises people's living standards. It also raises the cost of labor, which means you then look for the next cheapest place. Eventually, we'll run out because geography is finite. And there'll be no cheap labor left in the world. What'll happen? Well, we actually already see what's going to happen. We're going to shift to artificial intelligence and robotics to replace an increasing numbers of workers. This is simply the process of capitalism at work. That can't go on forever. You can't have a world where nobody's employed who's going to buy the stuff that the factories are producing. Economists are trying to figure this out. What do we do in a post-capitalist society? They're thinking about a new way to organize ourselves economically. You all are familiar with the globalization. Good points, bad points. One of the bad points is it's leading to the disintegration of various nations around the world. You're familiar with this. Catalonia just held a vote. They may pay a big price for that. They're not the only ones. China's Uyghurs want autonomy. The Kurds want autonomy. The Tyroleans in Italy want autonomy. The Scots may very well break away from Great Britain. England apparently is going to take the jump off the cliff and break away from the EU. Many of these movements are all happening because people want to keep folks of their own culture within their own walls and keep out other people. It won't happen. It won't happen. In Britain, it's not going to happen. Britain can break away from the EU. It doesn't mean that they're going to throw the Romanians and the Hungarians out, which is what many people who voted for the Brexit thought was going to happen. We're not going to throw Mexicans and Muslims out of the country. Not going to happen. But many people, of course, would like that to happen, and that's what this is reflecting, this desire to put walls up, break away, we'll control our own culture. Because people feel threatened when they have members of another culture living right down the street from them. It may not be an actual physical threat, but there's still a sense that things aren't right. They don't know what's going on because there are families there who look different, eat different food, dress different, have different customs. What's going on? You hear people saying. They feel uncomfortable. This is just culture shock, and anyone who's traveled abroad has felt it. This is the bad part of globalization, and it could produce increasing numbers of disintegrating nations. There's a good side, though, to it as well. Another cultural shift. It's a little hard to detect, but I think it's there. And it's the shift towards a sense that, yes, I'm a member of this nation, but my neighbors are everyone else. We see this in groups like Doctors Without Borders. They're the people who say, if people are hurting someplace, doesn't matter how bad it is, we're going there. Why would you do that? Because you see those people as your neighbors. And this is brought about by the technology that capitalism has developed in order to create a global economic system. Facebook, iPhones. I can pull up my iPhone right now and call anybody in the world. I can get on Facebook and check out what all my colleagues are doing in Finland and Russia and France. And it's instantaneous and it's remarkable. And it creates a different sense of exactly what you are a citizen of. For some people, they're not a citizen of a nation, they're a citizen of the world. This is being enhanced by sports, it's being enhanced by entertainment. Honestly, is there anyone in the world who doesn't know who Beyonce is? That she's carrying twins? I mean, does anybody not know this? I mean, even if you don't listen to modern music, it's there in front of you all the time. And that's created a very different sense of the acceptability of violence. June 1944, Eisenhower and Churchill are planning the D-Day Invasion. To plan that invasion, they had to figure out, how many hospital ships do we need? How many pints of blood? They had to know how many casualties were there going to be. Does anyone know how many casualties there were on D-Day in the first 24 hours? It was a little more than 10,000. We don't know the exact figure, but a little more than 10,000. About half of those deaths. And that's what Churchill and Eisenhower pretty much figured out, that's the casualty rate. And they said, that's a go. We can do that. So what if the generals came to the President of the United States and said, okay, we can do this operation in Syria, we'll put boots on the ground, but we're going to take 10,000 casualties in the first 24 hours. Could that president sell that to the American people? Could he? He couldn't. He couldn't sell it. We wouldn't accept it. Soon after Mr. Trump became president, there was an operation in, I believe it was Yemen, and we lost a Navy SEAL. Terrible thing. What did John McCain say? Anyone remember what John McCain said about it? As Trump said it was a success, John McCain said, if you lose one man, it's a failure. Oh my God, what if you told that to Churchill and Eisenhower? You can't lose one man. They said, well, that's impossible. It's war. It's nasty. It's hell. Someone's gonna die. But we won't accept it now. We won't accept that level of violence. We won't accept the collateral violence. We're angry when an Afghani wedding party is bombed. Could we firebomb Dresden? Firebomb Tokyo? We couldn't do that today. There's a shift in our culture, a shift in an idea of what the world is supposed to be like. And the world is not supposed to contain massive military deaths. It's just not. That's a shift in cultural ideas, and it's a good shift. It's a good shift. It goes along with the notion of world citizenship. We see it also in the United Nations. The UN has its problems. There are things in it that have got to get fixed. But it's a very explicit effort to say the world is going to work cooperatively. And we're going to do it without war, because war doesn't work. It does nothing except suck up huge amounts of resources that we desperately need in other places. So, what's going to be the effects of these three processes? This is the beginning of the end of war. That's the fifth beginning. It's the beginning of a post-capitalist economy. I don't know what it'll look like. I'm just an archaeologist. I'm not an economist. And it's the beginning of what I like to call global self-governance, because world government always scares people, right? So global self-governance. It's the beginning of the end of the nation state as this very sacred entity. They'll still exist. They'll still exist. But they won't take on this sacredness that they do now. That's a cultural idea, and that cultural idea is already shifting. The really good news, well, I should say, that's where I think we're going to go. That's where I think we ought to go. And I think we'll get there. The only question to me is whether we get there the easy way and just say, let's just skip all the hard parts and we'll just jump to this, right? Or whether we get there the hard way. And at the moment, it looks like the world's going to take the hard way. I sort of think of the world as being in a period of adolescence right now, right? And you can tell teenagers, don't do that. Don't do that. And it doesn't matter, right? They're going to go do it anyways. They have to learn the lesson for themselves. The thing that's different about this beginning than the other four beginnings, no one in the other four beginnings had any idea about the past. They didn't know about it. They didn't know that the world could be different. We know about the past. We know that the past was different. We know that the future could be radically different. Why not take charge of it? If we do that, the fifth beginning could be the most magnificent thing that ever happened to humanity, and this would be the most exciting time to be alive on the planet. Thank you.